require versus import. Both are methods to load and import other modules into the current script that we are executing. So why would we ever import modules? It's useful, you guys. It's really useful, right? Because you can have functions, you can have libraries, and then you can package this into a set of JavaScript files that you can just import, and then this file can import other libraries, and that file can import other libraries, and we end up with a package manager, which is its own lecture. We'll get to that. Node modules and all that beautiful packaged JSON here. But today, we're just focusing on import and require, because this is part of the architecture of Node. So we have to talk about it, right? In the architecture section. So yeah, it's we talked about that. It's useful. What happens when we import? We really reads a file from disk, load it, parse it, and then execute the script. We do all of these three things. Very critical to understand that loading a file is a read operation. And based on that, it could be expensive. If your module is large, it could be expensive to parse, and of course the execution at the end. So just keep that in mind when typing that three few words: require, right? Or import. But the question is, like, when do they actually load? That's the $1,000,000 question. And it depends. If you're using require, which is the old common JS syntax, which is still popular, people still prefer it to this day compared to import. Require always synchronously loads the module mostly at the initial phase, but you can defer it as well. But mostly, if you put require at the root, it's gonna load synchronously, and it's gonna read the file, it's gonna parse the file, and it's gonna execute the file. And it does all of that synchronously. And it supports conditional. You can put an if statement, say, hey, if this condition has met, only load this module if this condition is met. You cannot always do that with import. We'll come to that. There are certain types of import. Import is one of the most complicated, nasty functions that ever wrote. It's like a bunch of people that had never agreed on something. You know, it's just there's still so much weird syntax when it comes to that. But we'll come to that. I have my own opinion about that function. It can also be called during event loop, of course, in a timer, in the poll phase, all of that stuff. But here's the thing. You cannot call it outside a JS file. Right? It has to be a JS file. So if you want to use this fancy .module MJS, the Michael Jackson file, you cannot use require. You're going to get yelled at. And the reason people invented import and MJS is to make JavaScript runs. That's the sole reason. At least in my opinion, to make JavaScript runs. I want to write a script and I want this to run in the browser and in Node. And that was tough to do. Although that was the claim of JavaScript. It's like, hey, you can learn one language and you can execute the script on the back end, on the front end. But if you really think about it, the syntax of Node.js, when it first was born, it needed so much stuff that the browser didn't support, like reading files. So it had to invent its own, modules and require and CommonJS. And then later the standards caught up and then invented all of that stuff. And then Node had to catch up. So Node was basically the innovative runtime to bring all of this stuff together. And then, of course, the other runtimes followed and started, basically following the standards. But yeah, require. That's one way to do it. Go through an example. Here, we're requiring the module fs, which is a file system, right? I think it stands for file system, right? And then this will synchronously load, execute whatever code this thing has, and then give you a ready object to use. You're ready. By the time here, you're ready. So this took synchronously X amount of time to load, right? So this loads in the initial phase. And here's the thing. You can have an if statement that will never execute, and this code will never execute because f is not equal to 110, right? So this module will never execute. None of these stuff will execute. None of this stuff will load. So you can make require conditional. You can make a fancy stuff like, hey, if I'm looking for this file, only load it when I absolutely need it. And you need to think this way, guys. Never load things that you're never gonna use. And it might be so easy to require, or even import. But boy, you can optimize your code if you actually, it's like, hey, wait a minute. This particular piece of code will never run unless I actually, this condition is met. So you can put the whole thing into a block and load it only when necessary, right? And we're going to learn with import. I know I'm just like jumping the gun a little bit. With import, there are two types of import. Import the module and import X from. Totally different thing. Import X from executes immediately at the initial phase, even before the initial phase, which is scary, right? And people did it this way. I think it's just to avoid errors, right? Because people's like, why is my module not loading correctly? They say, do it this way. But we're going to come to that. So what I'm doing here is I'm reading a file, right? The file name, the current file name. By the way, the underscore file name is only available when you do a require. I have no idea why it's not available on import, but it is what it is. Underscore file name. So you go and you call this function. So this happened where? In the poll phase. So here I preserved an example where I'm loading the module D when the file is read, i.e. when the file is read in the poll phase and the callback is ready, load that thing. And then eventually end the initial phase. Of course, the output will look something like that, right? A start initial phase, very, very clear synchronous code. I like synchronicity in certain situations, right? Because it's predictable. And you do this, you read the file, and then after reading the file, we load D. And then, of course, if you notice, the initial phase has ended a long time ago, right? Because always reading file is at the poll phase. You're going to see, I'm going to always reference the poll phase, always reference the check phase, always reference all these phases as I'm talking about this stuff. This is going to be, it's going to solidify by the end of the course. You're going to be, it's going to solidify in your head. Do not worry. Shippai or shimpai? I forgot. Do not worry. Shimpai shimasen. Don't worry. Don't worry. La taqlaq. Do not worry, you guys. Everything is going to be very clear, my friends. Very clear. Okay, import. That's the selling point of our import, guys. That is the selling point to this name. The selling point of import is asynchronous. If you feel that you're requiring a lot of stuff and you're overloading the initial phase, and you really don't need things to be synchronous, then you can make it asynchronous and defer it to what? To the poll phase. Yes, guys. Import is just an IO. That's what I like about it. I'm going to say what I don't like about it in a minute. What I like about it is that they made it says, hey, it's just an IO. We're reading a file, so why don't we put it and defer it to the poll phase, just like anything else? The good thing about it is that, hey, you're just treating it as an IO. The bad thing about it is you cannot use any of your modules until you're in the poll phase. So, and a lot of us are used to using modules in the initial phase, right? Because like, hey, if you import something, you expect to immediately use it, but that will fail. right? If you immediately start to use it, like it's gonna fail because initial phase just runs right there and then, and it will say, hey, the module is not run because the initial phase has not finished yet and the poll phase didn't enter yet, so the module didn't technically load, and it goes all sorts of confusion, right? And once you understand that, it's like, that is why. So it just returns a promise, really. Import actually returns a promise, which you can await, right? And it gives you this feeling that, hey, I'm just awaiting the module. And then you can play with this, like you make it import then. Yes, you can just do a then. If the module does successfully do this, catch. You can do all this stuff. You cannot do this with require, right? You cannot do this with require. You cannot do like, hey, check if this module is there. If it's not there, load this instead. You cannot do this with require. It will give you a catch. It will give you it will halt node altogether. And you have to do a try catch, which is nasty. But with import, it will say, hey, the IO failed to load for one reason or another. Hey, let's say fetch, right? I'm importing fetch, and I want to make sure that it runs on both the browsers and the node. So you can do something like, hey, import fetch. Of course, fetch doesn't exist in the browser because it's a built-in function. If it fails, then go and do the normal. Just use fetch as is. I actually wrote this code exactly like this to write one single file that runs both on the browser and node, identical files. So that's powerful concept you can do with import, right? And it just scheduled like another other. Oh, and this is the power thing. You can use it both in .js and .mjs, right? It works on both. And it can be awaited to give you this synchronous feel. But here's the thing. Import X from is different. Completely different. Watch out for it. If you have code that says import X from, it's not gonna return a promise. It's actually gonna evaluate. And guess what? From my testing, and it depends on the node version you're using. I'm using 22, right? It's gonna load even before the initial phase. It's gonna load at the very, very start of the initial phase, before your first console message to be printed. We'll see that in a minute. All right, here's an import example where I'm mixing require and modules here. I'm gonna change that, but it's the same thing here in this example. So this will load synchronously. This will load asynchronously, right? I'm calling this here to load module A, and then there's a function which is not called yet. I'm gonna print before calling B, load module, which is this guy, which will call before module A, and then we'll attempt to load B, which really it's not gonna do anything because we're in the initial phase. And then I'm gonna print after importing B, and then go back and then print this, and then schedule a timer, print the timer. I like to do this so I can see clearly which phase we are in. And then we have read file to read this file, and then only then go and add that. Again, I'm adding those for reference so we can know where we are. And then doing a set immediate and all this mumbo jumbo. Look at that. So we have start initial phase, before calling B, before calling B, before importing module B, right? And then immediately, boop, after importing module B. Nothing about importing the module B. Module B has actually this code. Begin loading, I have dash dash added. I added dash dash so you can know that you are in the module. See? Nothing got loaded in the initial phase. After calling B, then by here, we ended the initial phase. So, boop, 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 all the way here, and then timer, read file. Then we have to we scheduled the callback to load module A, and then we scheduled the callback to load module B. And that's how you do it. In sequence. Let's go to the exception. If you ever do this, import X from, then it ignores everything. You see, even if it's all the way at the end, Node will scan the script and it will load it at the beginning. And this is what happened. Like, look at that. I'm importing Z from c.mjs. Look at that. It's the first thing that get executed, even before my start console message, which is crazy, right? So just watch out for that. And some people like this. It's like, hey, if I'm importing, I want to import and I want to immediately use it. I want to make it available. Some people like this, right? And now here's the thing, guys. A lot of JavaScript syntax I just don't like this stinking thing, like, oh, import :z equal from don't try to be smart, right? I don't like this one bit. You guys might be completely okay with it. You can use it. I'm not gonna use it in this course. This syntax should not exist in JavaScript, right? Don't add curly braces on this or pass in curly braces. It just so confuses. It's so hard to read. Maybe because I'm old, but passing this turns us into an object. It's not like, oh, actually it's the value of Z. No. Take the value as is, and if you want something in it, just do dot and use it. Don't try to be fancy, okay? That's just me, right? So some of you love this. It's all over the internet. It's crazy. So either people love it and I'm just the odd one, which, okay, I'll be the odd one, or it's just people copy and paste. I'm the only one that complains about this. No one complained about this except me. But yeah, it's just me. So you'll never see this stuff in this course, okay? And never in a single line of code that I wrote this. Oh, my God. Like all the Node examples too, like filled with this. Like, how do you read this? Like, it's just so. I'm just an old man. So don't listen to me. All right. So yeah, this, by the way, returns a dictionary object test which has this content, right? And you can see that there is a slight difference between the imports, and we're gonna go through that in the example. Here I am doing a normal import, right? Yeah. Let me show you something. Yeah. So here I'm doing a normal import, which returns a promise. So this is actually a promise, and I'm printing the promise. Boom, right? That makes sense. Which is kind of weird, right? You print a promise, but you cannot use this until it's resolved. So you need a dot then, right? Then. That's not a then. But yeah, I think you understand what I mean. You can await it and you get the value, right? And that will load module B. But look at that. After that, we loaded module A, then loaded module B. And here's another example. Import X from is the exception, and that is another exception. You cannot put it inside an if statement. That's just not allowed. You get this error. Import declaration can only be used at the top level of the module. So you cannot do conditionals. Good luck doing conditionals on that one. So in a sense, this looks like a require, but a more restricted require, if you ask me, right? But that's just like the way it is, right? Yeah, let's go through some examples, you guys. Okay, so what do we have here? We have an example that we're printing the initial phase. We're printing the file name. And here's the thing. Anything that relative to the file name, we do .a.js. And it's basically we're going to load anything within the current path within that file name. Not where you execute Node. Like we are in the Node course content, which is the root. But the module are loaded from the perspective of the file name, okay? So that's just another thing to watch out for. And we have, we're loading module A.js. I'm just switching, I'm just using both JS and MJS here. This will never execute. Module A will never be loaded. Maybe we should change it to module B, because like we already loaded B, huh? That's weird to load B twice, A twice. Yeah, this will never load, B will never load, and then we're requiring the FS, and then we're loading, reading the file, and then we're loading D. So let's go ahead and run that. 09090. And you can see that B was never loaded. Module A, and then end the initial phase. Immediately we printed this, and then we loaded A, right? That's the, then that's it, end the initial phase. Then we read the file, and then we loaded module A, right? So we can dynamically load modules as needed. Let's go through the import example. With the import, I'm gonna play some games here. I'm gonna call import A, gonna load the function. There is a function here that will import module B, and then I'm gonna call the function module B, then I'm gonna set a timer for reference. Gonna do now fs, but I'm gonna use it using import, which then, because it returns a promise, I'm gonna do a then. If the fs successfully loaded, go ahead and load this file, a.mjs, which is just a file that exists here, right? Because we cannot use the file name, unfortunately, when we're doing import modules for some reason. Okay, it's just not there. So the convenience is gone. We're gonna read that, and then we're gonna do set immediate for reference because of the check phase right after the poll phase. So we're gonna get this first, then we're gonna get the immediate. Okay, and then eventually, well, this is gonna be printed way before. Let's do import 091. We're gonna start the initial phase, B, then start before importing B, but we never imported the B module, right? Where's the B module? Yeah, we just powered through it because this is a promise, right? We printed the promise. Here it is. And what else? After importing the B, we really didn't import it, right? After calling B, right here, and then we have end the initial phase. We're done. We set at the timer. This is just like power through. All this stuff is asynchronous. We ended the initial phase, and then we moved to the timer. And yeah, we did the timer. We did the read file, then immediate, which is the check phase. Then we came back, and we had two things to do, right? We executed a read for the module A, and we executed a read for module B, right? Because they were scheduled, these two reads were scheduled as 2 reads and 2 callbacks. They were not ready. But then when we came back, A got, of course, loaded before B, which makes sense because that was added before B. Now, unless there was like a situation where A was so slow to load, maybe it's a very large fire, or the thread pool was busy and we couldn't load A before B, so B might load before A, right? Absolutely, this can happen. It's just the order of things. The poll phase doesn't care. Like, it all depends like which read gonna come first, and first come, first serve, essentially, right? Async await, I don't think we can go through this. It's the same thing, right? We're just doing an async await. This is identical, but we're gonna do an async await. Let's do this various one. It's just an interesting one here. I'm gonna show you some interesting things. So we can still add if statements like one equal to never load a module with import, but you cannot do it with import z from. Right? This particular syntax will fail. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm adding a next stack to indicate the end of the initial phase in this particular case. And let's go ahead. Node 09093. What is the output? Ooh, invalid left hand assignment. What did I do? Huh? The heck? Left hand side assignment. What does that mean? Oh, double. All right. Yes. I cannot assign 2 to 1. That doesn't make any sense. All right. So here I'm not loading module A. I'm awaiting the load of module B. And then I am loading module C. So what will happen is, of course, module C will load first based on the knowledge of import from, right? I should call this C so we don't go confusing, huh? Much better this way. Yeah. Let's just call this A. I don't know why I called them Z. Right? So this goes first, see? Even before the initial phase, which is crazy. And then we have the module B get loaded. So things completely change when we have await and import C. So all of a sudden now we start loading stuff within the initial phase. But what really happened is all because I think it's because of this await. So let's remove this await and see what's happening. Is it different? Exactly. Remember what await does, guys? Await does this callback thing, right? It just change anything after that makes it a callback. So if you load this, then this will never execute until B is successfully loaded, which was what will happen. So with the initial phase in this case is all messed up if we have an await in it, because anything after that will get executed. So will get scheduled as a callback, right? So that's what happened. If I'm running this, look what happened. I did a start, right? And then all of a sudden, nothing. All of a sudden, module B gets loaded because we told import to await it, i.e., hey, I don't care. Go and load it right now. So will it load in the IO phase? Probably, right? But the next stick here gets really confusing because is it the next stick after the initial phase? I doubt it. I think this was scheduled to do in the poll phase, but we just scheduled it and then we awaited it. And that's why we got module B loaded. Then, of course, after that, we printed this, the output of this, and then this is the C, this is B, right? This is B. B gives you the whole module, by the way. It's slightly different than from the output or from import C from, right? And then, of course, we get import C. The actual print statement also comes after B was loaded. That explains why we got C here. And then, of course, end this guy. And then we got the next stick scheduled, right? So here's what happened, I think. All the initial phase has ended. The true initial phase has ended right here, actually. The moment we see an await, initial phase is ended. That's it. The job is ended. We moved on to the next phase. And there's nothing underneath this code that will run in the initial phase because there is an await. That means we're going to schedule everything as a callback, right? So we go and import must execute in the poll phase, right? So we'll have to pass by the timer phase. And here, let's prove my theory. If this doesn't work, then I mean, I cannot explain anything anymore. Let's see what happens. We're testing stuff. I love this stuff, man. I love it. Yep. Look at that. Yep. My theory is right. Start, timer. Add a timer. Start, timer. This proves that the initial phase has ended. The last thing we did was this. That's the last thing we did in the initial phase. This is where it ended. We scheduled this and it ended. When we see the first await, that ends the initial phase and moves on. You see how complex this stuff is, man. This is so complex. But yeah, timer. That proves that, hey, we entered the timer phase right here. And timer can never be executed unless we finish the initial phase. So we were done with the initial phase, which explains that why we're loading the modules here, because B has been loaded successfully because we're in the pull phase. And then we get B as a result. And B here is a module. We get back a whole module object. And we can play with this a little bit. Let's do a json.stringify just for my curiosity. What do we get back as a result? Look at that. This is how it looks like, huh? It's a object with a default object, and that's what we get back. Versus, what do we get back from this? If I load this directly. By the way, I didn't show you the output of these guys, but I'm essentially just doing export default test. I'm exporting that whole object. This is the result that I'm returning, right? And we're just playing with this here. Do you like this, guys? Let me know in the Q&A section if you enjoy this stuff, because this is just like playing with how Node, you know, just finessing things together. Yeah, look at that. I love this thing. Look at that. So this, if you ever got this is different than this, right? So this returns a default object. Can I change it? Can I like, in B, can I say export just test? What is the difference? I could never get this to run without default. It has to be export test, export default test for some reason. Yeah, that gives you a whole module. Yeah. And of course, if you uncomment this line, I did it on purpose, you cannot even run the code. You're gonna get import declaration must be at the top level, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter what this condition is. So just watch out for this, guys. I think that's the end of the import versus require. Watch out for this. There are so many ways to build a module and reference it and have it consumed. But do I have a preference? If it wasn't me, I don't want to use this. I'd rather have control. This doesn't give you control. Import X from. And that's just me. But this is, again, programming is all, it comes to preference at the end of the day, right? So what do you prefer? Now that you know how things work, don't be afraid to test. Don't be afraid to experiment. Everyone should really experiment by themselves. And that's the only way we truly learn, by not fearing to experiment and not fearing to be called out if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm going to admit I'm wrong, right? Because you would be surprised, you guys. I spent maybe 7 months or close to a year working on this course. And every single version of Node, they change how things react. That's why I have how things are done. So the output can change based on which version of Node you're using. But that's why I kept these similar nodes. I didn't use edge cases. Whatever I gave you here, 99% of the time, you're going to get the same output as me. And if you don't, that's because it's explainable based on, how the kernel and Node as a program interact together, which is also explainable, right? Which we can make consistent. Move to the next one.